Hey, everybody. I hope you're all well, and I hope you've all had a wonderful couple of days. I hope you're all looking forward to the new year. I'm looking forward to the new year. I have a couple of weeks off work, which means you get more content from me. Yay! Hopefully, it's yay. Anyway, I was going to go in front of the camera today. I have my camera, but it turns out that my camera is rubbish and it doesn't like filming. It can take really nice photographs, but it doesn't like filming. It doesn't help me out at all. So thank you, Sony, for that. Well, I'm just going to do my normal video, as you can see. But I have my phone and I have a webcam because I bought my webcam to make videos with Murder at Bedtime by Lyndon in the future. And I'm going to test them out to see which one worked the best. And then whichever one is better, or if they're both rubbish, I'm just going to save up for a camera. And then when the camera get here, I'll record and go in front of the camera then. So it's all a little bit up in the air at the minute how I'm going to do it. But I did plan on going in front of the camera and it just didn't work out very well. So today's case obviously come with the same for your discretion, and today's case we're covering is David Edwards. David was a well-liked man. He was a really nice man. He was always smiling. He was a funny guy. He loved his football and he would attend a lot of football matches. He was very sociable and he was just a really kind, nice person to be around. He worked as a very successful criminal defense solicitor, and David actually was then beginning a relationship with Debbie. Debbie and David met on a night out one night, and later on, Debbie found out she was actually pregnant with David's child. So things were on the up. David was so excited. He was like over the moon about this news, and he would attend every single checkup, every single scan, appointment, anything Debbie had to go to. David was right beside her. He would make sure she had home cooked food, and he would just generally look after Debbie as much as he possibly could. Then Debbie gave birth to their little girl. David was then a hands-on dad. He would go to work, come home, change nappies or diapers. He would do night feeds. He would basically participate and do as much as Debbie did, because that's what he wanted to do. You know, he wanted to make sure he did his fair share. Debbie was in awe of David. She really, really loved him so much. So much so that when David had to attend court for his work, she would go to the court and watch David at work. She thought he was brilliant and she was so proud of him. She loved watching him at work and she was just so happy. But sadly, when their daughter was around 5 years old, the relationship started to break down and resulted in them two splitting up. Now, I don't think it was anything bad, as in anyone cheating or anything bad happening, because they did remain really good friends. And Debbie actually still cooked meals for David. So obviously it didn't end badly. It was probably more, I love you, but I can't live with you sort of situation. And then I think it was around like 6 or 7 months later after they split up, in June 2014, David actually met another person. So David was 50 years old at the time, and he began a relationship with 41-year-old Sharon Manser. So David had previously known Sharon through his work. He represented a former partner of Sharon's in court because basically he was violent, or apparently violent, against Sharon. And Sharon was there saying that she was a domestic violence victim. David actually got the partner off, and it was proven that he wasn't actually violent to Sharon and Sharon wasn't a victim. Sharon was really impressed by David, and she actually asked for help regarding a neighbour that she was actually having trouble with. Then that was basically it. They didn't see each other for numerous years. Their paths never crossed for a very long time. Then one day David was on Facebook and he was scrolling through Facebook, as you do, or as you don't. I don't have Facebook. But he was scrolling through Facebook and then he came across Sharon's profile picture, so he decided to add her as a friend. Their relationship began, and basically quite quickly, I think Sharon moved into David's home in Lancashire in 2014. But things just wasn't as it seems. When David, he had his daughter obviously to take care of, and he would regularly see Debbie. And then one day he went to Debbie's house and he was in pain, so she asked what was wrong, and it turned out that David had a broken collarbone. So Debbie asked what had happened, as you naturally would, and David said that he fell down the stairs. Now, I don't think Debbie actually believed him, but there wasn't much she could do because this is what David kept saying. And it didn't help when Debbie first met Sharon. Their first meeting didn't go down well. So Debbie and David's daughter was going to a pie. Debbie was working, and David was supposed to take the daughter to the party. But David and Sharon had drank all day. They were completely intoxicated and they couldn't take her to the party, but they turned up at Debbie's home. Debbie phoned David up and found out that he was drunk, basically, and said, "There's no way on earth you're taking our daughter anywhere. Go home or go anywhere, but you're not taking her anywhere. Come back another day if you want to see her." And Sharon was not happy about this. So when Debbie come back from work, she found Sharon banging on her door and kicking her door, wanting to speak to Debbie. She was really angry. But Debbie didn't really care because there was no way she was letting her daughter go anywhere with them. They were drunk. So Debbie was basically like, no, she's not gone with you. And she just didn't take Sharon's rubbish, basically. And that was the first time she ever met her. But something must have happened and they must have got to know each other because Debbie and David obviously had a great relationship and they had agreement that they would share parental responsibility, which meant their daughter was going to stay overnight at David and Sharon's home. And Debbie said that Sharon was actually really good with their daughter and she trusted her. So there must have been some kind of sort of meeting and getting to know each other because Debbie wouldn't allow anyone to take care of her daughter if she didn't trust her. But David and Debbie, they had a great relationship and they would often have a chat when David would come round and collect their daughter. Debbie and him would chat around and, they just got on. But one day David came to collect their daughter and his appearance had changed. He wasn't as happy. He wasn't as chatty. He looked sort of a little bit unkept. He just wasn't himself. He was normally quite a confident man. And he had bruises and cuts. He even had a black eye once and scratches on him. And he was just completely different to what Debbie knew him as. And he told Debbie that he walked into a door and he just kept making excuses up for these cuts and bruises. And even the people that he worked with noticed that his behavior changed and he had cuts on him and bruises on him when he turned up for work. June the 21st, 2015, it was Father's Day. And they had an arrangement that David was going to take care of his child. Debbie was in full cooperation with this. She knew that this would mean the world to him. But Debbie received a phone call off David, and he stated that he couldn't come round to have their daughter that day. He's really sorry, but he couldn't come round. But Debbie was fuming. She went round David's house to find out what the hell was going on. She didn't know why he wouldn't, and she didn't understand why he wouldn't, because this wasn't like him. And as soon as he opened the door, Debbie understood. David stood there with a handprint around his throat. He had deep scratches on his face and his lip was split. David was a former shell of himself, and he didn't want his daughter to see him like this. And he still insisted that he fell over. It wasn't until later on that when he was at work, he let slip that there was a couple of his friends at work, I think he sort of confided in, and he said to his colleagues that Sharon was the one that was violent towards him, and she would have a drink and then she would get angry and throw an ashtray or a telephone or whatever was in her range, and she would throw it at him. This resulted in his cuts and bruises. But as soon as someone else would say it, he would deny it. David wasn't a violent man at all. He was kind, he was caring, and one of his close friends actually described him as soft. I think what they meant by that is he was just really kind and caring and wouldn't stand up for himself. He wasn't violent. He would never be violent towards Sharon. I think that's what he meant. and he wouldn't report his injuries to the police. He didn't want to take any further action. He loved Sharon, and they actually went on holiday together. He would spoil Sharon. She loved to look nice. She loved his job. He was able to fund her in her expensive taste, and I can only imagine that he thought she might change if he did everything she wanted. Later on in June, David and Sharon ended up getting married in Las Vegas. Now, this was a year after they first started to get together. But no one attended their wedding, not anyone. It was just basically them two. And on their wedding day itself, David and Sharon had another argument. And Sharon lost her temper again, and she threw a phone at David and it hit him straight in the face on the corner of his eye. This resulted in David getting like a black eye. There was a bruise over his eye. And then Sharon tried to cover it up for the wedding photos by putting makeup on him to disguise it. But you can actually see his bruised face on the photographs. When they returned back home from their wedding, Sharon was in full control of David's life. She was bullying him even more. She was violent. She controlled who he spoke to, who he saw. And one of the people that he wasn't allowed to speak to was Debbie. If Debbie wanted to contact David about their child or anything, because they were friends, she had to go through Sharon first. Now, if Debbie wanted to see David, this was never going to happen. Basically, on the very rare occasion Debbie did see David, Sharon was standing right next to him, and David didn't even really speak. Sharon would speak for him. She was in full control of everything. David had lost a lot of weight, and he just wasn't the same person anymore. He had no confidence at all. And you've got to remember, he's a successful criminal defense solicitor. Remembering that his confidence peaked when he was in front of people. He had no problem being around people. But because of Sharon, this had all changed, and he wasn't the same anymore. His work started to go downhill, and some days he just let his clients down. He didn't turn up for work. He was completely out of character. He just wasn't the same. You can imagine that she's chipping away at him, and you just go inside yourself more and more and shut the outside out, don't you? You know, you don't want to be there so everyone can see you. And that's exactly what he was doing. So his work was obviously being affected by Sharon's behavior towards him, and he was constantly on edge of Sharon. She would turn up randomly at his work, for instance. Like, she would phone up his work, phone up the secretary and ask where he was. If he wasn't in the office, she would kick off and come down to his work. So when he wasn't there, when she turned up, she would go even more crazy and start screaming at the secretary or anyone who was in his office. And really, all what was going on was David was in court because he was working. But Sharon, she just didn't believe him, and she was verbally abusive to the secretary. She didn't believe anything anyone said. She thought everyone was just lying. So she became aggressive to everybody. And then around 4 weeks after their wedding, Debbie just had enough. She couldn't cope anymore with their behavior. And she kind of felt like her daughter was not safe anymore, even though Debbie knew, or Sharon had never shown any kind of violence or anything towards their daughter. Being around it is just not healthy, is it? You don't want your child to be around any violence. And so Debbie said that David couldn't have their daughter at his house anymore. There's no way. She's put a stop to it. She said that if Dave wanted to see his child, he could go round Debbie's at any time and see their child, or Debbie was willing to meet David away from Sharon safely so he could see their child. So she wasn't being unreasonable at all. Debbie didn't hear from David for 2 weeks. And then one day, David phoned up Debbie and said that he missed their daughter so much he couldn't take it anymore. He needed to see her. He then explained to Debbie that his life was a living hell. He was living in fear in his own home, and he couldn't handle it anymore. Debbie said to David that things are not going to change. They're just going to get worse. You need to leave her. She's going to end up killing you, David. And that was the last time David ever spoke to Debbie again. Now, there was 2 consistent days. I believe the 22nd and the 23rd is where incidents happened. And I think it started on the 22nd and then went through the night and continued to the 23rd. That's how I believe it happened. It might be a little bit wrong, but there was 2 days that it happened on the 22nd and 23rd. So it started off with Sharon and David. They'd been on holiday in Spain and they returned home on the 22nd of August. I don't know what time they got home, but they got home. They then started to have a drink, and both of them obviously were heavy drinkers. And then the night time, they got into an argument. It's believed that Sharon, I think she had a knife in her hand, and she hurt David in the chest and the leg. David was in the bathroom and he was calling out for help in the bathroom. Sharon's 19-year-old daughter heard David calling, and so she went up to the bathroom to help him. She helped David to make sure he was all right, and she saw him on the floor bleeding out with his chest and his leg. She then went over to her mum, Sharon, and asked what had happened and why did she hurt David. Sharon then says that they'd been drinking heavy and this was just an accident. She said that she didn't mean to do it. I did read that Sharon's daughter actually called the police, but the police didn't press any charges towards Sharon. It's believed that then, later on, Sharon and David, I think they went to an off license and they were seen in the off license arguing. And I think they then went to a pub. Now, they were in the pub having a drink, and then David's wounds, what she'd done, started to bleed through his clothes. People started to notice that the blood was seeping through the clothes, and then they obviously became concerned to make sure that David was all right. They were asking him, are you all right? You're bleeding. And the one person that wasn't concerned was Sharon. So it wasn't long before they both left the pub. Too many questions. They had to get out. Sharon became aggressive outside the pub, and they were arguing in the street. So much so, there was a police car driving past at the time, and the police officers decided to stop and diffuse the situation. They wanted to find out what was going on and basically calm the situation down, just to make sure everyone was all right. So the female officer, you can hear talking to Sharon, and I believe there was a male officer as well. So the female officer is telling Sharon to calm down because she's obviously the one being more verbal. Sharon freaks out when the female police officer, I think she puts her hand on her and says, you need to calm down. Why don't you go sit in the back of the car and calm down and I'll find out what's going on, the officer says. Sharon then kicks off saying, don't you touch me. Don't you dare touch me, to the officer, and she's freaking out. This was all captured on the police officer's body cam.
Okay. No, she touched me. Yes, and I'll touch it again unless you shut up and calm down. I will arrest you.
Sharon was also heard saying to David, I'm going to kill you. Now, David was in the footage, and you could actually see in the footage that David was standing there. Sharon was arguing. There was another police officer. I believe he was a male. And then there was a female police officer that was actually trying to diffuse the situation because she could see that David was sort of being attacked, if you will. Now, the male police officer is seen, I swear he's seen laughing. I keep watching it and I keep seeing, it looks like he's laughing at Sharon because Sharon's sort of belittling David and David's sort of standing there and she's talking down to him. Now, the police officer looked like he's laughing, finding the whole situation funny. Now, there's nothing funny about this situation, and if the tables were turned, would the police officer find it funny? I don't think so. So he shouldn't be thinking it's funny now. It's then said that there was no charges brought towards Sharon. The only thing that the police officers wanted to do was make sure that they got home safe. So they decided that they were going to take David and Sharon home. So they decided that they would give him a lift home, and they still had their body cam on, and they were in the back of the car. David and Sharon were in the car, And you could still hear Sharon talking to David or shouting at David. And then she says, on her way home, she says, I swear, David, when I wake up tomorrow, I don't know what mood I'm going to be in. And this was on the body cam. As she gets out of the car, you can hear like Sharon saying to the police officer, "Oh, you've been so nice. Oh, I know I said I'd kill him, but I didn't actually mean I'm going to kill him." And then the police officer going, "Yeah, I was nice because you were nice, basically. I will try and put the footage in, but a lot of it is copywritten, so wouldn't let me use it on YouTube." This is one of the reasons why I'm going to go in front of the camera more, because I'm so limited to photographs and the things that I want to do or cases I want to cover because of photographs. So this is why I'm going to go in front of the camera.
I swear, David, when I wake up tomorrow, I don't know what mood I'm going to be in. There you go, Sharon.
Thank you, officer.
Not a problem.
Oh, why have you been so nice?
Because you've been nice to me, haven't you?
I'm so going to have to kill. Well, when I say I kill him, I'm not looking at
They then continued their argument inside the house. So they were in the kitchen. It's said that Sharon told David that she had applied for some kind of tax credits, I think for their funding, I don't know why. But Sharon said that she had a knife in her hand and they were arguing, and David walked into the knife, and this resulted in him being stabbed in the chest. Sharon didn't call the ambulance, she said, because David told her not to call any ambulance. But later on, Sharon was seen running outside screaming and crying and shouting. A neighbour heard her screaming, so she came over to see if Sharon was all right. And Sharon said that David wasn't breathing, so the neighbour actually called an ambulance from Sharon's phone. But when the ambulance and the police arrived at the scene, David was found lying in a heavily blood-stained bed with a stab wound to his chest. They didn't believe Sharon's story at all. David was apparently the one that walked into the knife. Sharon told him that they had been arguing and they had torn up a lot of the wedding photographs, and you could see this all over the floor. There was a 13-inch blood-stained knife also found at the crime scene. Sharon was arrested for the murder of David because David had passed away. And then Sharon was taken to the police station and she was questioned. So she was saying that she had an argument with David and he walked into the knife. But she said, he's not dead though. And she kept saying, and then she said, we'd had a drink. There was a lot of drink involved and he'd lost his job and he became really depressed. She then said that David took the knife and pointed it at her. And then she said she managed to get the knife off David and she pointed it and David walked into the knife. But he's not dead. She said, I'm not being rude. He's not dead. I have not murdered my husband and my husband is certainly not dead. This is what she said. She then said that David was lying on the sofa and then he stopped bleeding. So they decided to go upstairs and have sex. Later, she then noticed that he wasn't breathing, so she ran outside to get help. The police didn't believe what Sharon was saying. They could see that she was acting a little bit different and she had a different personality to what she was trying to make out. The police went back to the house because obviously now this was a crime scene and they wanted to gather as much evidence as possible. They could see that there was a lot of alcohol abuse in the home. And they also said that even though this was a really lovely house, it was kind of unkept. But at the crime scene in the kitchen where David was stabbed, this was very apparent that someone had actually cleaned up the crime scene, because where you would expect a lot of blood and untidiness, there wasn't really much at all. The pathologist confirmed that David had died from a single stab wound into his heart. Now, this ruled out that David just walked into the knife, because they said that he wouldn't physically be able to just walk into a knife and pierce his chest and go through straight to his heart. It would have to be quite a force. And because she only said he walked into it, it wouldn't happen. The pathologist also said that sadly David died a very slow death, which explained all of the blood on the bed. It's believed that when David was lying on the bed bleeding out, So there was this 13-inch knife, but apparently it was about 3 or 4 inches that went in. And it's like, if you imagine a tap that was running but not full, it's just seeping out. And this is what happened to Dave. So David was bleeding out on the bed, and it said that Sharon must have went downstairs and cleaned the kitchen. And then she was obviously debating what her next move would be. This would take us into, obviously, late into the 23rd. So by the 24th of August, in the morning on the 24th of August, actually, Debbie had a knock on the door. And when she opened the door, she was confronted by 2 police officers. She didn't quite fully understand why they were there, because obviously you're in shock, I suppose, if 2 police officers are standing at your door. Then she heard one of them. The police officer said, "There isn't any easy way to say this, but David, he's been killed last night." And Debbie said straight away, "Did she do it?" Meaning Sharon. Now, Sharon was placed on remand. She wasn't actually able to have bail. The police wouldn't let her, so she was just placed on remand until her court hearing. And in Manchester Crown Court on the 8th of March 2016, she appeared in court. Sharon Edwards not only abused David verbally, physically, mentally, she also denied guilt. She said that she wasn't guilty of what she was being accused of. And then this meant she was going to put David's friends and family through the ordeal of having to sit through a trial, listening to the horrendous torture, basically, that he went through in his house and resulting in his death. She didn't care. She just made them all sit through it, which was terrible. During the trial, she actually it said that she called David in front of strangers. She would shout out at his work saying, "What sort of man are you?" Or, "What sort of effing man are you?" she would say. She would always belittle him in front of people. And before his death, David, he was classed as a victim of forceful bullying. And he had suffered at the hands of Sharon many, many times during the long 1-year relationship they had. It was a very long 1-year relationship, I believe. No, she had beaten him and she belittled him. She was awful. She was an awful human being towards him. The jury heard how Sharon had chipped away at David's soul, and Sharon had the idea of being a solicitor's wife. She loved that idea of being a solicitor's wife. She loved that he made partner in the firm. She loved that he had a lovely home that she could go into, and he earned very good money. Now, this would make David able to fund Sharon's lifestyle, like I told you. So Sharon found out that David had lost his job because he didn't turn up for work on occasions that he smelled of alcohol, and because Sharon was violent towards him and she controlled him and she belittled him and made him a shadow of the person he once was. So he didn't want to go out of the house, resulting in David not being able to do his job, and they had to let him go. Yet the reason why he lost his job is because of her, and she was angry because he now couldn't afford her lifestyle, like all her expensive jewelry, all the clothes she wanted, the holidays she wanted. It was all going away because David said that she was bleeding him dry. He was running out of money. He was in debt. And once before he met Sharon, he was never in debt. He had a lot of money, but she had taken it all away from him. Sharon did try to turn it around on her husband in court, and she said that their relationship had been very intense. The relationship was very passionate, very loving. She said that her husband was a very jealous man, and he would often call her a whore or a slut. And when he was stressed, he would say the number 16 to her. And this was referring to her being pregnant at the age of 16. Sharon had 4 children. Sharon goes on to say that David hated his job and he would come home from work saying that he couldn't cope. And this was all completely untrue. She was just turning it all around on David and trying to make him look like the bad one when it was completely Sharon. The autopsy found that David had 60 external injuries to his body, over the year period they were together. 30 of them were prod wounds where she had stabbed him in the knee, in the thigh, in the fingers. He had shallow wounds in his scalp where she had attacked him. And the jury also heard that David actually did go to hospital on an occasion. I think it was only once, really. And he did actually tell staff that he was in a domestic violence relationship. He said that his wife had inflicted these injuries that he had in the hospital. And it's believed that the staff did listen to David and they referred him to the appropriate agencies. But it said that the agencies didn't really do anything to help David because David refused to say that Sharon abused him. And Sharon would always state that all of his injuries were always caused as a result of David being intoxicated and fallen over the coffee table, the door, the garage door, whatever. He would always fall over because he was too drunk. That's what she would always say. The jury heard David actually speaking in his own voice, in his own words. He was on a recording which it was recording a conversation between himself and Sharon accidentally. Now you can hear David saying that they need to make up a better excuse because people are not believing what he is saying happened to him.
We're going to have to refine the excuse for me eye. You know the garage door that we made up? That doesn't wash, I've just told Chris, and he's not having it. You said to me, I'd like to think that I could punch you and knock you out with a single punch. Well, I've told you, you do it rather hard, Sharon, don't you?
And this is his own word, so she can't deny hurting him when it's on the tape saying that in his own voice, you know. Sharon's 19-year-old daughter, who helped David when he was in the bathroom through his wounds, and then I think she called the police and they did nothing. It's believed that Sharon's daughter actually was a witness in the trial against her own mother. Now, the jury unanimously convicted Sharon of the murder of David Edwards, and before the sentencing commenced, the court heard that Sharon had previous convictions and cautions relating to domestic abuse, including one in 2004 where she attacked a former partner who, well, she bit him on the forearm and then she punched him in the side of the face. The judge read out just before Sharon was sentenced a letter that he received. So it said that David was a hugely valued member of the community that he lived in, and his work said that over the years they have come to know David well, and he was a very engaging person. He was always proud of his reputation and integrity as an officer of the court. His death was a tragic death and affected every member of the bench. The judge goes on to tell Sharon that because of her bullying of David, which ended in his tragic death, people have been robbed of a very decent man. You are someone who attacked people in the past. You have a bullying and violent nature. The judge goes on to say that he accepts that Sharon did not intend to kill David, but because of her actions, she certainly meant to cause him serious harm. And the verdict was read out to Sharon, and she was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 20 years before she can apply for parole. It is said that Sharon became tearful when the verdict was read out, but due to her never showing any kind of remorse throughout the trial, these tears were for herself, having to spend the next 20 years or so in prison. David's brother, Peter Edwards, thanked the jury for delivering the verdict, adding that the family were relieved that the legal process is now at an end and they can now start to remember all the good things about David's life. It's been 6 months since David's death, and we are truly grateful for everybody who helped and supported us, including David's friends and colleagues. We will miss David very much. Speaking outside Manchester Crown Court, Peter Edwards, He said that men fear coming forward because they are viewed as weak. This is a sign of weakness. This case was highlighted the tragic impact of domestic violence can have and shows how difficult it can be for those victims to speak up and escape their situation, he said. This is especially the case for male victims who are afraid to speak up, telling what happened to them, and then they are viewed as a sign of weakness. This has got to stop, and now it's got to stop. On Tuesday, December the 5th, Sharon Edwards decided that she was going to take her case to London for the Court of Appeal. She wanted to clear her name, and she claimed that David did walk into the knife which killed him. She said that the press coverage also impacted the case. However, 3 senior judges refused for her to have permission. They were not going to hear her appeal against her sentence or conviction at all. They were having none of it. So, like many victims of domestic violence, David Edwards did not go to the police. He chose to suffer in silence. Victims are reluctant to talk because they are either embarrassed or they think that they're not going to be believed or they're going to be shamed. Figures from the crime survey in England and Wales suggest that 600,000 men were victims of domestic abuse in the year of March 2015. The Crown Prosecution Service says that this is a significant underreporting of domestic abuse against male victims. There is Mankind Initiative, and this is where you need to go for help. It's a confidential helpline that is available for male victims of domestic abuse and domestic violence across the UK, as well as their friends, family and neighbours and work colleagues and employees. They provide information and support that helps men suffering from domestic abuse, from current or former partners, wives, including same-sex partners or husbands. There's a range of physical violence or objects thrown, everything, anything you can imagine. No matter who you are, no matter how old you are, what race you are, sexuality you are, where you work, anything. It doesn't matter if you're a builder, a banker, a dustman, or a doctor. Domestic violence, it doesn't discriminate for anyone, ever. So please go get help. Mankind is where you need to go. I will put the number. So if you want to get hold of Mankind, if you're a male victim of domestic abuse or domestic violence, you can call I think this is just UK number, 01823 334244. 01823 334244. This appalling tragedy proves once again that men, as well as women, are the victims of domestic abuse. Mr. Brooks said that the fact that Mr. Edwards was a solicitor shows that it makes no difference of your background, your job, whatsoever. This is a crime, it's a terrible crime, and anyone is at risk of this crime. It is vital that these men that are being abused in these relationships seek help from the police or helplines. Anybody that they trust, they need to get help from. Men may struggle to be believed, but in this case and in every other case, it needs to stop. This is very real and they need help now. David had told around 11 people of his abuse and he had suffered at the hands of his partner, and David didn't get help when he needed it. Thank you so much for watching today's episode. I will be back in 3 days' time. Happy New Year to all of you. I wish you a healthy and happy New Year. And thank you all for a wonderful year on YouTube. I'm so happy that I have you all with me, and I'm so grateful that you support me and stick with me, because since September I've been so inconsistent with my job, and you just totally understand that I have my family and I need to pay my bills. So thank you all so very much. 2022 is going to be completely different, and I am going to be completely focused on my channel. I do have my job still, but I have less hours at work, so which means I am able to focus more on my YouTube channel, which means I'm going to be able to bring you more content a week, which makes everyone happy. And then one day, hopefully, fingers crossed in the future, YouTube can be my job. That would be the dream. Take care, everyone. Much love, as always, Lindsay.